So when I'm defining masculinity to the boys that I work with, I often describe it as the way in which men project or perform their ideas of what it means to be a man. Now, this might sound commonsensical to you if you're listening. You might be like, yeah, of course, that's just, of course, there's that makes total sense. Or you might be thinking, I'm not quite sure why you've approached it that way. And I'm going to explain my approach in this episode. And I just want to start by saying, if you are new here, it's your first time checking in to an episode of mine, this is my perspective and not the perspective. And so this is in no way, shape, or form the definition of masculinity that I think we should all be using. This is something that I have used over the years that I think works really well with young masculinities who are either confused or unsure about what masculinity means, or need some help or guidance around making sense of how that shows up for them in their lives. And as someone that's worked adjacent to academia for many years, I feel like at times the conversations and the theoretical frameworks for masculinity and gender performance in general are just very complex and very multi-layered for most people to kind of engage with. And that's not because people aren't able to engage with those ideas, might I add, but it's just it takes a lot of time to kind of really sit, reflect, think through, and get to a point of, okay, I understand what's happening, I understand what we're talking about here. And for many of us that are listening, or many of us that are trying to have conversations about things like masculinity, about things like gender performance, we might not have a lot of time to be able to sift through the granular when it comes to conversations about masculinity. And when someone asks us, well, what is masculinity? We might need something that feels a little bit quicker and a little bit more to the point when it comes to what we're trying to discuss, reflect on. And the reason I talk about masculinity in the way that I do is because there is an element of performance when it comes to masculinity I think is really important for young masculinities, young men, young people in general to really wrap their heads around. And so often what I will do in addition to that is I'll talk about video games, and specifically the video games where you can create characters, whether that is, for example, FIFA, where you can kind of create your own pro, or, other online games where you've kind of got your character that you work and engage with that game world and navigate that game world with, rather. There's an element of creation and there's an element of intention that really goes into that. If you know about games and you know about gaming culture, there's a lot of effort that goes into that creation and construction process. And for me, I like to make that link when it comes to conversations around masculinity, because that same intention, that same creativity can, and in my opinion, absolutely must be applied to the way in which we project, express, and perform our ideas of what it means to be a man. Historically, we have had very rigid ideas of what being a man means or should mean. Emotionally stoic, protect, provide, typically the person in control or in that position of leadership. And those ideas within those sort of frames or subheadings, for lack of a better term, there comes very specific rigid expectations that come with masculinity, that come with the normalization of times of emotional suppression. Like you shouldn't really, no one cares about how you feel as a man, just get on with it, for example. Or your ideas of masculinity, the main purpose of masculinity is to protect and provide. You will be the person in control, you will be in that position of leadership. And in some spaces, that idea of position of leadership can become, oh no, I need to be dominant. What I say goes. And if what I say doesn't go, then I have to enact and enforce my will in those spaces. And enforcing that will can be in a range of different ways. But in the most extreme cases, it's often through intense and extreme violence, right? Those ideas of masculinity are very rigid, and they create the impression that being a man is done in a very specific way. And if you deviate away from those expectations, then you're not a man. You're not living up to what it means to be a man. And the young people, the young men that I work with have that anxiety. If I break away from those ideas of masculinity, if I show emotion, if I express emotion, if I am a little bit more quiet, if I don't necessarily want to take a position of leadership or step up into certain leadership positions, that makes me less of a man. I feel like I have to do what's expected of me as opposed to what feels authentic to me. These are the sort of tensions that these young people are often navigating and trying to make sense of. So using the analogy of masculinity as creation and also as performance, for me, roots young people and young masculinity is in proximity to conversations around, well, what does it mean for me to be a man? What does it mean for me to be me at sort of a deeper level? And how can I use that process of creation to create the version of masculinity that means something personally to me, but also helps the communities that I'm a part of, helps the communities that I'm existing within? The creativity process and creativity aspect of masculinity is something I feel we need to bring back into conversations. It isn't a rigid one size fits all. I've talked about this in the past as the multiplicity of masculinity. And essentially what I'm talking about there is this idea that masculinity is very varied. Even if you've got a room full of boys that might have similar sentiments of what they feel at that point in time being a man is and what it looks like, what it walks like, what it talks like, there will also be a lot of differences in that approach, differences in that perspective that often boys' masculinities don't get time to really think about and discuss and hear from different people and their different ideas, to be challenged, not from a position of, I hate that and you're wrong because, but help me to understand, I'm really interested in why that means something to you. Have you considered it from that way? Or in some instances, I understand why that means a lot to you, but that can actually be quite harmful because normalizing different ideas and perspectives existing simultaneously and curiously examining and inspecting and thinking about those ideas. Do I want that? Do I want to bring that into my idea of masculinity? Is that the best approach in this context? Is that the best way of thinking about how I want to be a man in that space? It creates a room for reflection and for intentional creation. The other analogy, if the gaming space doesn't work for you, is kind of like pick and mix as well, right? A pick and mix, you might have your go-tos and you might have the thing that you always get, and that's the way it is, the way it's always been for you, right? But you can try different things, and sometimes you might be feeling less like what you usually go for. Maybe you want to try something new. Maybe you want to try a few new things and see how they sort of land with you. Those ideas of masculinity can also very much apply to that analogy. We've been conditioned to move away from, for example, more overt expressions of emotionality, more overt expressions of vulnerability, because we've been conditioned, we've inherited this notion that showing emotions as a man and showing vulnerability as a man puts you in a position where someone might take advantage of you. But the flip side of that is emotional vulnerability and vulnerability across a range of different, spaces and contexts can create deeper relationships, friendships, platonic connections with people. You can draw close to the people that are around you, and that community grows stronger. That inheritance of this is what it means to be a man and doing this positions you as weak, not a man, feminine, if you do X, Y, or Z, is something that I feel like we should be challenging. And we should be challenging by actually rooting a lot of our discussions of masculinity and by extension gender as this process of creation. I am intentionally creating, crafting, refining, redefining what I think it means to be a man all the time. When I'm exposed to new ideas, new perspectives, new belief systems, which is why I say this is my perspective and not the perspective, because I'm always curious enough to examine different ideas and perspective and not rooted enough in specific embodiments to think that this is me for life. And I think this is the process that is most useful and fruitful to conversations around masculinity, where there's a lot of confusion and complexity. There is a lot of different voices, ideas, and perspectives outside in the online spaces, in the offline spaces that are producing and perpetuating the notion that masculinity must be this way or else, or this is the way it's always been. Then you've got someone else arguing it from a different perspective with the same framing. If we create space for creation, curiosity, refinement, we take the pressure off of getting things right from society's eyes and create the conditions for boys to intentionally, communally craft their ideas of what it means to be a man, but also what it means to be a human in those community spaces that they're a part of. That for me is what's important. And that's how I like to approach conversations around masculinity in the spaces that I work within and the young people that I serve. But as I said, this is my perspective and not the perspective. There are professionals and dear friends and colleagues and peers in the space that I work within that do this and approach it slightly differently and get wonderful results as well. For me, my lived experience of things that I find useful, i.e. gaming and pick a mix, that it just popped up to me one day while I was in the shop, and I was like, there's something here. It's a little bit like masculinity, right? And for those of you that are sociologically inclined as well and have done work in sort of pick and mix identity too, there is that framing as well, that probably subconsciously influenced me at that point too, because I was around, I don't know how young I was at that point, but I was young enough into my career to kind of make the link, and I had done a bit of stuff on pick and mix identity as well. So it's probably that meshing. I'm working this out in real time, by the way, which is pretty funny. But I'm going to keep it in because, for those of you that are new here, this is a very standard procedure. This is a stream of consciousness that I try and distill as short as I can, but hopefully there's enough nutrients in there for you to digest and think about. But that's how I like to approach it. And that's how I've approached it over the years. And I found that young people, specifically young men, really get a lot out of that approach, because when they think about it as a creative process and they attach it to something that they've already got awareness of, it creates space for them to think about, well, how am I intentionally crafting what I think it means to be a man? And who can I learn from? Who can I take ideas and perspectives from? Not just men, but the human beings that are present within and across their lives. So there's just some thoughts for you to think about and reflect on and see where they land for you. And if you do like episodes like this, I'm more than happy to do more of them in the future, because again, it is useful for me to maybe get some of these ideas out into the world, but also for those of you that are working with young people, having different ideas and perspectives can help you in terms of the work that you do as well. So I hope you found this episode useful. And if you are here for the first time, I hope you stick around and check out the other episodes that we've got across the channels, but also join in for future episodes too. But thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate you. Stay well, stay blessed, and I will see you in a future episode very, very soon. Bye bye now.